Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our virtual event this morning. If you'll give us a minute, we're waiting for people to join us. It takes a minute for everyone to be able to log in once we turn the recording on. So welcome. My name is Monica Medina, and I'll be guiding us through this discussion this morning. And we're just going to wait another minute or so until people sign on. But while you're signing on, I just want to say on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for being here this morning on a summer morning to talk about right whales. We're very excited to share the knowledge of these wonderful panelists, and if you could just be patient a minute or two more while people gather in our virtual room, we'll get started in just another minute. Okay, I think we have everyone gathered and assembled. Welcome again. My name is Monica Medina. I'm the founder and publisher of a daily environmental e-newsletter called Our Daily Planet, where we cover lots of issues, including the plight of the North Atlantic right whale. I want to welcome everyone again this morning. We have a wonderful panel discussion about right whales in Canada. And we're very, very pleased to be able to bring it to you as the second in a series of 3 right whale webinars that IFAW has sponsored. The next one, just in case you're interested in signing on again, the next one will be in early September on certification and consumer demand for ropelessly caught lobsters. That's another great innovation, and I know they're working hard to bring that discussion to you in early September. So, to set the stage, climate change is warming the waters of the Northwest Atlantic Ocean very rapidly. This is changing the distribution patterns of many marine species in the region, including cod and other ground fish, crabs, lobsters, and whales. We've seen increasing mortality of the North Atlantic right whale in recent years due to ship strikes and gear entanglements, and there are only about 400 remaining, and not very many breeding age females. So it's really a do or die moment for the North Atlantic right whale. We recently held a virtual webinar on efforts that are ongoing in the US and Canada to develop ropeless gear for fishers to reduce the risks to whales during the fishing season, which overlaps with whale feeding and migrating season in US waters. And even President Trump made a visit to Maine recently in which he talked with US lobster fishers, and he opened up, sadly, he opened up a protected area that had been closed to fishing. That was one of the main ways that we were protecting right whales and other endangered species in US waters. The US government is not moving particularly quickly to protect the North Atlantic right whale and to put regulations in place that would add to the protections that they already have. And a federal judge even ordered the National Marine Fisheries Services to come up with a better plan, but it's a problem that needs both countries to solve it, because the whales migrate between US and Canadian waters. They straddle our 2 countries' ocean areas. So today we're going to focus on Canada and what Canada's done in recent years. It's been a difficult time for Canada. There have been numerous deaths in the last 5 years in Canadian waters, unfortunately. And the Canadian government has really been working to step up its efforts to protect the North Atlantic right whale. So today we have 2 wonderful speakers with us. We have Pat Zaat, who runs the IFAW, International Fund for Animal Welfare, offices in Canada and all their programs. She's an expert on right whales. And we have Moira W, who's a research scientist with the Canadian Whale Institute and a leader in the Campobello Whale Rescue Team, which is very active, unfortunately, but does great work saving whales. Just one more note for everyone. We will take audience questions at the end. So if you have a question, send it to us via the chat feature. And the program, this event is being recorded and will be shared online. So in case you want to share it with someone else who couldn't tune in today, it will be available online. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us this morning. And I'm going to turn it over to Pat to talk us through what IFAW is doing in Canada on right whale conservation. Pat, take it away.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share my screen. So if you'll just bear with me, I'm going to do that right now. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, so I just wanted to take a few minutes to just set the stage a little bit before we get into a bit of the question and answer component of this webinar. The North Atlantic right whale, their numbers were depleted by whaling in the 1800s, and it was so named because it was the right whale to kill. It was slow moving and it floated when it was dead. Sadly now, just about 400 remain. The right whale can live up to 60 years, but recently very few have made it that long, mostly being killed right now by vessel strikes or entanglements in fishing gear. Females are larger than males, and one calf can be born every 3 to 4 years on average, but recently now we're seeing only one calf being born every 10 years. Calves are born in the winter off the coast of southeast US, and then whales migrate north to the Atlantic to feed on tiny copepod. They're smaller than a grain of rice. And the roughened patches that you see on the whale's head actually form unique patterns that allow scientists to distinguish between the whales. And the New England Aquarium that is based in Boston actually maintains the ID catalog of the right whales from the North Atlantic. So the current status in Canada, the North Atlantic right whale was actually listed as endangered under the Species at Risk Act in 2005. A recovery strategy was published in 2009, and a proposed action plan was published in 2016. And this action plan is currently under review, and we'll just talk a little bit more about that at the end of the webinar. And just last week, the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, updated their red listing, and they moved the North Atlantic right whale from endangered to critically endangered. So as you mentioned at the beginning, Monica, it has been a bit of a tough go for right whales, and since 2017, 31 right whales have died in US and Canada waters, and 21 in the Canadian waters alone. When the cause of death could be determined, all were due to human activities. So that would be either as a result of a vessel strike or entanglements. And you will see that the birth rate for that same time period has only been 17 calves that have been born. And in Canada, we're seeing that there is an overlap between the presence of right whales in fixed gear fisheries, which would be snow crab and lobster, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Bay of Fundy. And there's also an increase in vessels strikes that are in their area. So in 2017, that was when we first saw a gross mortality of 12 whales that died in Canadian waters. And this prompted the Government of Canada to enact measures to reduce the risk of entanglements and ship strikes. And these measures really have been adaptively managed year over year. So this is just a snapshot of the fishing measures that have been introduced by the Canadian government and how they have been enhanced year over year. And for 2020, these mitigation measures for fisheries include gear markings, a season-long closures in the Gulf of St. Lawrence to fixed gear fisheries, which would be crab and lobster and other fisheries, when whales are detected in more than once in 15 days. And there are also, these closures are now being triggered not only by visual surveillance, but also by acoustic detection. And since May of 2020, at least 20 whales have been identified in the Gulf of St. Lawrence by various efforts. And these sightings are used to inform the mitigation measures and the closures and slowdowns for vessels. And new for this year is that these measures can be triggered by acoustic detection. And this map that you're looking at here was actually developed by Dalhousie University in Halifax. And I can share the link for that later on if anyone's interested. You can actually go live and actually see the sightings of whales. The North Atlantic right whale is now spending more time feeding in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and this is where there is an increased risk of vessel strikes. And this is a snapshot of the marine traffic taken at 4 p.m. yesterday. It shows those vessels only that have automatic identification systems, so those are AIS, that would be on board transmitting their location. So you can see here that there's different colors that are identifying the different types of vessels. The green would be cargo, red would be tankers, blue would be passenger, and pink would be fisher. And on average, there's probably about somewhere around 7 ships a day that would be transiting the shipping lanes. This map shows the mitigation measures that the government enacted to reduce the risk of vessel strikes. You'll see that the green section on the map, that's the shipping lanes that you would have seen here on this map previously. And vessels here can transit at normal speeds if there are no right whale sightings. But if a right whale is detected in that area, there is a slowdown that is triggered for 15 days. And there's also 2 seasonal management areas where a slowdown protocol can be triggered by the detection of a right whale. And there is mandatory restricted area now that will, new for this year, that's also protecting the whales that are aggregating in the Shediac Valley. So vessels longer than 13 meters should avoid this area or must travel at a speed of 8 knots when they're transiting through this area. And I had mentioned that the Canadian government has updated their action plan to protect right whales. And we have an action online that we're asking people to go to IFAW.org and to ask the government to do more to protect right whales in Canada. So I'll pause there.
Great, thanks Pat, so much.
I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time, so hopefully we can delve into a little bit more of some of the questions that might come up.
Great. Am I unmuted now? It looks like I am. Great. So thank you so much, Pat, for that. And I really am amazed by how much the mapping has advanced in the last 20 years. Since I started working on this, when we first had cell phones and people would see whales with their cell phone and call it in. And now the kind of instant technology and awareness that we have is really making it possible to do much more. So let me turn it now over to Moira Brown to talk about her research. And it's really been over the course of a very long period of time. So she's quite deep into whales, and we really are looking forward to hearing what she's up to and what she's seen recently even. Moira, please.
Well, first let me share what we had yesterday, because I think it was an example of how, you know, 2 to 3 decades of working with the shipping industry and you know, just countless measures on both sides of the border to try and take action to reduce the risk to right whales really paid off for one little right whale that's just a year old, a little female. So yesterday, right here on Campobello Island, you know, we're about 25 nautical miles from the critical habitat for right whales in the Grand Manan Basin. And the shipping lanes were moved away from that back in 2003 as a result of ship strikes before that. So that was a successful move and garnered a lot of awareness amongst both the shipping industry and the fishing industry in the Bay of Fundy. So yesterday we got a call at the office from a whale watch boat that operates out of St. Andrews, New Brunswick. They had a right whale right off the northern edge of Campobello Island. So our director for whale rescue, Mackie Green, he has a whale watch boat. So we jumped on board and went out to photograph it. And we ended up following this whale for hours and hours yesterday. It was first seen at 11 our time. And I think Mackie finally watched it swim back out into the Bay of Fundy at about 6 o'clock last night. But in the meantime, it went on quite a tour along the coast. And I mean, within a couple hundred yards of the coast. Right along Deer Island, for those of you who know this area, there's a cruise ship tied up in Eastport, Maine, just laying over while it has nowhere else to be. It passed right along the side of that, got down to the edge, and then hightailed it back into Canadian waters and came right up along the coast on Campobello Island. So we went out and got some photographs, and our colleagues at the New England Aquarium were able to match this whale to a calf that was born last year in 2019. It's a little female. Its mom was number 2791, and it was seen in the Gulf of St. Lawrence last year. So this whale's made it from Florida to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Who knows where it was over the wintertime, but it came and gave us a visit yesterday. And so tremendous international effort. Of course, I just happened to phone the local pilot station over in Eastport, Maine, just to see if there was a ship coming in. You know, there haven't been many. And sure enough, there was one coming in. And so our colleague, Bob Peacock, was on board bringing that ship in, and the whale, he encountered the whale right in the narrowest part. And so he cut the engines and slowed right down. The whale surfaced beside the ship and then surfaced behind the ship. So Mackie was also in his boat on the water, just kind of shepherding the little whale through, as well as the pilot boat. So any incident was averted, and hopefully that little whale will stop playing chicken with ships for the rest of the summer.
Wow, what a great story about international cooperation and the efforts of the local folks all through the bay there to make sure that that little whale was safe and able to get back out to sea where it can continue to grow and hopefully reproduce one of these days. Yeah. So Pat, so now we're gonna turn to some questions between myself and Pat and Mo, and then we'll open up to audience questions in a few minutes. So if you have questions, please send them our way. We'll get to them in just a little bit. Pat, you had talked about the changes in the distribution patterns of the North Atlantic right whale in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. How fast are these changes happening? You know, we see that climate change is really impacting this part of the Atlantic Ocean even more than other parts of the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and it's causing distributions in fisheries patterns and fishing patterns. Tell us about what we know about right whale distribution patterns and how that challenges the government when they're trying to manage fisheries and keep right whales safe.
Yeah, so I think what's happened is since about 2015, there was a change in the distribution of where the North Atlantic right whale was showing up in Canadian waters. And certainly around 2015 is that when they started to see a few more that were showing up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So that area now has obviously been a priority for government for surveillance. And they're basing dynamic mitigation measures to ensure that they are doing all they can, but the whales are using this area. Whales don't observe fences, you know, this is their habitat. And so there is going to be interactions that will possibly happen between vessels with gear that's in the water. So I think right now, it is a lot of information the government is doing research, they're collecting visual information, and every year we're seeing that they're actually adjusting slightly their mitigation measures to be the most precautionary that they can be. So it is a continually evolving situation, and I think that's where I actually see that the government is doing what they can, but it is a challenging situation right now.
Yeah, it is challenging. Having been in the government, I can tell you it is hard when things move quickly and you have to give public notice and you don't want to leave people surprised or in a position to not be able to comply. And yet the conditions are changing so fast that the government needs to act quickly or we won't have the precautions in the right places and the necessary measures in place in order to protect the whales, and there are so few left. So Mo, let's ask you, tell us about what you know about where the whales are moving inside the Gulf, and tell us how many you're seeing, and what do you think about the population? I know you're only seeing some of them. Do you have any guess where they are when they're not in the bay?
So in Canadian waters, there's been a team studying right whales in this area, initially led by the New England Aquarium since 1980. So we've got 4 decades of being able to take the pulse of the population of right whales in the Bay of Fundy. Same boat, some of the same researchers, and the same kind of season. And so, Bay of Fundy was home to right whales late July, August, September into October. Some early sightings in May, some late sightings in December, January, but for the most part, it was summer, early fall. And year after year, up until about 2010. And some years we would have over half the population documented through the photo identification program here in the Bay of Fundy. Second research area south of Nova Scotia called Roseway Basin, also a critical habitat designated by the Canadian government. So we had 2. Lots of right whales there too in some years, not as continuous research effort, but still well surveyed over the last 4 decades, at least 20 of those years. So in 2010, we started to notice we were getting fewer right whales for shorter periods of time. And it was quite dramatic. We'd go out and it was rare. We'd just go out and survey day after day and not see any right whales. And then a pulse would come in, they'd stay for a little while and then they'd be gone again. And that started in 2010. And with the exception of 2016, that's been going on that whole decade. It took us a little while to figure out where the right whales have gone. An aerial survey done by our colleagues at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center in 2015 that was directed by our oceanographic colleagues and myself, our colleagues at Dalhousie University, focused an aerial survey in that same kind of deep water basin where right whales aggregate to feed in the Bay of Fundy and south of Nova Scotia and also east of Cape Cod in the springtime. So we have an idea of what factors are aggregating those little tiny plankton, the copepods, to make it worthwhile for a right whale to open its mouth. And sure enough, it's called the Shediac Valley. It is between the Acadian Peninsula and the Magdalen Islands in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And when the Northeast Fisheries Science Center team flew over there in 2015, they saw 35 right whales, the most that had ever been seen in a single day in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. We'd had some coastal sightings in the Gulf of St. Lawrence dating back a couple of decades, mostly by whale watch groups or members of the public that had submitted photograph sightings, but never these kinds of numbers. And it sort of was like, oh, okay, so that's where our right whales are. And so since 2015, there has been an increased research effort, the non-governmental groups. And of course, after 2017 and the 12 mortalities that were found in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the Canadian government has stepped in. 2 agencies, primarily Fisheries and Oceans Canada, that's responsible for, it's like the counterpart of National Marine Fisheries Service. They regulate fishing and they're also responsible for the recovery of endangered marine mammal species, but also Transport Canada that regulates maritime safety in Canada. So those 2 agencies have stepped in with a lot of aerial surveillance over the past couple of years, and the whale map that Pat referred to earlier that's online, it's publicly available, it's updated every day with the latest surveillance sightings. And so we have a pretty good handle. About 150 right whales a year are showing up in the Gulf. There's a pretty high return rate from year to year, which is a bit unusual for right whale habitat areas. So it still means we're missing about half the population in the summertime. And where to look is a very good question. Probably deep water basins that would likely aggregate plankton. We need to locate some of those and figure out how to get visual surveys out there or acoustic recording devices out there to see if right whales are present.
Yeah, when there's so few left, we really need to try to get a beat on where they are in order to conserve them. It's really interesting. And you said yesterday when we had our pre-meeting about this, there's even a population that stayed up north that hasn't traveled all the way down to the southern coast of the US, that there may be a population that just sort of stays up in New England over the winter.
Yeah, we're not really sure about that. So the challenge is, you know, we've had really good research efforts in the wintertime down in Florida where the calving ground is. In some years, there's an influx of other segments of the population other than mothers and calves, so juveniles, females that aren't calving, or males, towards February, March, but not every year. It's inconsistent. And so we actually really don't know where most of the population is in the wintertime. We wonder if they might be just along the edge of the shelf break, perhaps. For a while, we thought there was a breeding ground in a place called Jordan Basin, which is about right in the central Gulf of Maine, about 50 miles south of Bar Harbor, Maine. And of course, the minute the paper was published, the whales started not to show up there anymore in the winter months when we would expect conception to be taking place. So November, December, January. So there's a huge array of acoustic devices that are along the edge of the shelf and over the continental shelf and along the edge now. And some early analysis shows that right whales calls have been detected in pretty much every month but March along the Nova Scotia coast. But again, we can't count animals from calls. We don't know how many are calling. So, just little snippets of information are starting to come to make themselves available after these acoustic devices are analyzed, because those particular ones are in the water for long periods of time, let's say a year. And so we don't get to analyze the data for quite a while. But, hopefully we'll piece it together and start figuring out where to look for other habitat areas for right whales in the times of the year where we still have gaps in data, even after 4 decades of studying the species.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we still need to know. And it's so important to know it because they're so much on the precipice. The IUCN, as you mentioned, Pat, recently listed them as their most critically endangered, one of the most critically endangered species. They have various levels of endangerment, and this species is now at the edge. Pat, tell us how much time you think we might have, given that slide about the mortality rate being larger than the birth rate. How much time do you and your colleagues believe we have to turn things around? And, what is the point of no return, really, since we're at already just 400?
Well, I think we're at the tipping point right now. So we know that right whales are not dying of natural causes, and that the number that are being killed each year are surpassing the births. So we know right now is the time for us to take action. I think we can take action to protect these whales. I think scientists have kind of estimated that 20 to 25 years, if we're not seeing a reversal in these trends, that there could be no hope for this species. But I think that now is the time for us where we can. I've seen the Canadian government step up, take action. I've seen a lot of commitment from fishermen and the different industry groups that are actually stepping up. So I think we are at the tipping point now, but it's not too late.
That's good. We can be optimistic. Mo, tell us about some of your work in disentanglement and the Disentanglement Network in Canada. I know we have a very active one in the US. Tell us about what you've been doing in Canada as far as disentanglement goes. Fishing gear is obviously a huge problem.
Yeah, the whale rescue effort was started actually in Newfoundland back in the late 1970s in response to humpback whales getting caught in cod traps. And that was John Lean, the late John Lean, who shared his techniques freely, and the Center for Coastal Studies down in the US initially started in the 1980s locally, again, in response to local problems. And that's just been hugely expanded now. And there are non-governmental and governmental groups that are trained to respond all along the east coast of the US. In Canada, we're working on increasing the capacity for response, but right now we still have a team in Newfoundland, and we have a team here on Campobello Island, the Campobello Whale Rescue Team. Whale rescue was brought to the Bay of Fundy in about 1999 and then over to Campobello in 2002. And that team was started by Mackie Green and our dear friend, the late Joe Howlett. So our response area now, for years we were volunteers, but now we actually have some funding so that we can have a working team, both year round to respond to whales in the summertime and then in the wintertime to train new whale rescuers. And we are focusing on fishermen that are based up in Shippagan in the Gulf of St. Lawrence right now to build a local team in that area. So right now, our response area is Bay of Fundy, coast of Nova Scotia, and the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence into the St. Lawrence River up to Tadoussac, which is a huge response area. Last year, we spent many days up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence responding to a couple of entangled right whales up there. We were able to do partial disentanglements on both of those, and those animals were both later seen gear-free. So good results. You know, we talk about disentanglement like it's going shopping. And, you know, I would like your listeners to understand how just incredibly difficult disentanglement is, no matter where it occurs, no matter how close the team is. A whale is seen, if it's free swimming, you know, how do you keep an eye on it while you wait for the team to get out? The weather's got to be good enough for the team to get out. Quite often a day or two goes by and the animal has to be relocated. All of the successes we have with disentanglement are extremely hard won by many groups, both in third-party NGOs and working with government and researchers and just a huge collaborative effort. So we'd really all like to be put out of business. Disentanglement is just a Band-Aid for the animals we happen to find. There are a lot of efforts going on to find different ways to fish in order really to put us, all the whale rescuers, out of business. We'd like to go back just to research, quite honestly. We'll keep going and we'll try to expand our ability to respond in Canada while there is a need. But they're certainly amongst the snow crab fishery up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the fishermen there really want to solve this problem. They want to be able to get snow crab on board without putting whales at risk. And so they're working with others to try experimental gear to try and fish without rope that was alluded to earlier. And they're, you know, if they're going to if they can solve the problem, we don't care who solves it, as long as that knowledge is shared with all of the different fisheries along the coast to reduce that problem, because it's just one, you know, when you see these whales entangled, you can just, you know, you really get a sense of how these animals are suffering.
Yeah, and you have such a large amount of water to cover there, and it is dangerous. It's not just difficult, it's dangerous. And
Yeah.
It's really heartwarming to hear how much the fishermen are willing to be engaged, not just in maybe changing their behavior, but in also participating in the network of disentanglement, you know, folks who are willing to get in their boats and go when they hear the call. So Pat, tell us a little bit about that, talking about fishermen and their acceptance of some of these changes. We know they don't want to be responsible for right whale deaths, but they also have a business to run. And it's challenging to change, particularly when there are lots of changes in regulations and we have to have dynamic management. Tell us a little bit about how fishermen are embracing some of the new regulations, and, you know, in addition to being willing to volunteer, what are they doing? What kinds of gear are they experimenting with, and how's it going in Canada?
Yeah, and I think that it's fair to say that no fisherman or woman wants to have a right whale caught in their gear. I think it's very fair to say that. And I think that there has been a commitment by the fishermen that are in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, especially with the mitigation measures where they need to move their gear. They have, I think, 48 to 72 hours to remove their gear if a whale is sighted and a grid is closed. So they are being asked to be very responsive, to be able to remove their gear. And so I think that we've seen the mitigation measures change year over year, and they have been complying with those mitigation measures. There's a variety of different gear testing that is being done. And I think it was back in February, there was an innovation summit where some of the early results of this gear testing was released. It's still in a development phase. I think there still needs to be a bit more work done with especially with the snow crab gear, the rope. It's heavy rope. So I think there is a lot of practicalities that need to be worked out, and it needs to be done by with the fishermen. They're the ones that are using this gear. It needs to work for them. So I think that there's a commitment. And I also think that in Canada, there has been a fund that's been set up that will help support gear testing that's happening. I know that there's some gear testing, I think, that may be happening this summer in some closed areas in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So there's obviously a commitment that I'm seeing from fishermen to be part of the solution. And I think that's a really important component, is that they're part of the solution. Mo had mentioned the Campobello Whale Rescue Team. They were founded by fishermen. These were men out on the water who saw a need to be able to help these disentangle whales. And so I do really believe that there's, it is of course difficult to change the way that you do things, and that's why there needs to be a real good effort between industry and technology to be able to see where can we go from here? How can we get rope out of the water?
Yeah, it's really an ongoing effort, and it is great that the Canadian government put together a fund to help fishermen pay for some of this, because it's not cheap. So let me ask one last question, and then we have a few questions from the audience, and this one's for either of you. Tell me about how, and we haven't actually said the word in 30 minutes, so it feels like a break, but how has the COVID pandemic changed your work this summer? Has it impacted you at all? Has it impacted the number of ships or the number of hours you can be out on the water doing research? Tell me about that.
Well, with respect to our research in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, excuse me, and the R is Canadian Whale Institute, New England Aquarium, University of New Brunswick, and Dalhousie University. So we have an international interprovincial team that has been chartering a snow crab vessel for the last few years to do right whale research and oceanographic research, in particular plankton and various water parameters. We have actually had to cancel that research this summer. We had a cruise planned for one for July and one for August, and there were a number of different reasons. One, of course, is that our US colleagues couldn't get across the border. So we've had to cancel that this year. So thank goodness there's good aerial surveillance going on by both Transport Canada and Fisheries and Oceans up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, so that we're getting some photo ID data. The New England Aquarium is going to be able to do their survey in the Bay of Fundy. So that's not going to be interrupted. So that is a good thing. And our whale rescue team is on standby. We have responded to a couple of incidents so far. The most recent one was a possible right whale that was entangled in the Gulf, and our team was almost all the way there. It's about a 7-hour drive for us to get there, towing our rescue boat, when we realized that, in fact, this whale was not entangled. It was had been seen from an aircraft, and the marine mammal observers on the Transport Canada plane had done a good job of documenting it. And we realized it was a previously entangled whale that had scarring from an entanglement that was actually in the image. So it wasn't a new entanglement, and there weren't any lines. So that was a relief. But we are on standby, to respond as the summer goes on. I am encouraged in the Gulf of St. Lawrence that despite the pressure that the seafaring industry is under with the pandemic for many, many reasons, that the mandatory measures in the Gulf of St. Lawrence are being implemented by the government and are being complied with by the shipping and the fishing industries. So, it is a tough time for all of us, but it's good that the protection of the right whale is still being carried on in Canadian waters. We have identified, those groups are all submitting photographs to the New England Aquarium, and those good folks have identified at least 90 right whales in the Gulf so far this year. So the animals are there, plus one in the Bay of Fundy.
That's great. And just a shout out quickly to the New England Aquarium for all their great work. I know they have many scientists that are engaged on right whale research and conservation. So Pat, how about you? How's it changed your efforts this summer?
So we've been monitoring the mitigation measures that have been enacted. And what's interesting is, like, one of the things is that there are fewer cruise ships now that are obviously going into these waters. So there are some, obviously for us, fewer vessels interactions is a good thing. We don't want to see the cruise ship industry obviously have issues, but we are seeing that there's a little bit less activity that's happening in some of these areas. Cruise ships can't come into ports until the end of October at the earliest. So that might relieve some of the pressure overlay between vessels and whales being in that area. But of course, it's a challenging time. We're doing work over Skype and Zoom calls. I'm in the same provinces as Mo, but I don't know if we'll have a chance to actually see each other. And if we do, it'll be, you know, at a distance. But yeah, we're you know, making it work as best we can.
Great. Well, we have some great audience questions. Let me get right to those. The first one is concerning the number of deaths that we could attribute to one thing or another. We've talked about ship strikes and we've talked about gear. There were 31 mortality events over the last few years. I think you said since 2015. Do you know which thing is the most, that puts whales most at risk? Which thing is causing the deaths? Is it ship strikes? Is it entanglements, or is it something else?
No, it's entanglements and ship strikes, and you know, not all of the carcasses, unfortunately, have been able to be retrieved for necropsy, and necropsies are not always necessarily conclusive either. Up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, we have seen more mortalities from ship strikes than gear entanglements, but we also have a number of live gear, you know, entanglements that we've been hopefully able to resolve, but until we see the animal again, we don't know if our actions have been successful. I don't have the actual numbers in front of me, but I can certainly provide those at a later date for you to post. But up in the Gulf, it varies by area. You know, in US waters, unfortunately, we've lost 2 calves this year. Probably due to vessel strikes, one for sure, and one in all likelihood. So, you know, those are still the 2 primary human-related interactions with right whales that are causing the mortality.
Yeah, it really is a question of trying to, you know, fix regulations on those 2 things. You know, attach regulations to those 2 activities to make them more safe for whales. Another question came in about the shipping lanes and the movement of the shipping lanes. I guess, Mo, you were involved in that. How challenging was that process? And I know the same thing happened in the US in and out of Boston Harbor, a change in shipping lanes that we realized through new technology. You know, we could change the shipping lanes and make the ships more efficient and get out of the whale's way. Tell us about what happened in Canada on that same topic.
In 2002, Transport Canada submitted a proposal to the International Maritime Organization, which is part of the United Nations, and it's based in London, England, to relocate the Bay of Fundy shipping lanes from an area with a high concentration of right whales to an area with a lower concentration of whales. There was actually room in the Bay of Fundy to relocate the lanes to the east of where the critical habitat area was. Before that time, we had at least 3 mortalities in the Bay of Fundy attributed to ship strikes. And since that time, there have been a couple of ship strike mortalities, but one was a whale that drifted up from south of Nova Scotia, and the other one was a much smaller vessel than the commercial ships that would normally go through those lanes. So it has worked out quite well in the Bay of Fundy. There were no speed restrictions put in place in the Bay of Fundy because it's the harbor at St. John is a tidally restricted harbor. And a lot of the vessels are actually challenged with navigating through that area with currents and fog. And so we didn't go with any speed restrictions at that time. Now, if a right whale was seen in those shipping lanes, Transport Canada has a mitigation measure dealing with that would slow ships down. South of Nova Scotia, there was an area to be avoided put in place because there weren't any designated shipping lanes. There were routes of habitual use. And so we basically put a big 4-sided figure around the high concentration of right whales and voluntarily asked the ships to avoid that area. And initially compliance was quite high. Compliance is lower now, but in our examination of the data, we see that there's a lot of just new vessels coming through that area. About half the vessels coming through are new. And I think also a lot of people, you know, there's so much in the news about the Gulf of St. Lawrence. People may think that Rosaway Basin is no longer used by right whales. We have less survey effort out there, but there are still a few right whales seen during that limited survey effort from year to year. in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, there are shipping lanes in various places, but the image that Pat showed is actually a shipping corridor that is surveyed every good weather day by a Transport Canada aircraft. They survey it as much as they can, as often as they can, and as much of that corridor as they can. And if a whale is seen in that area, then vessels are slowed down to 10 knots or less for 15 days. And a survey actually has to occur where no whales are seen in order for that speed to increase again. So it's very much a dynamic measure. And the areas and the various grids that Pat showed, that has been adapted each year and sometimes within a year as we get new information on right whales for that.
Is 15 days the right amount of time? And how much do they have to slow down? Talk about, you know, exactly what a change that makes for the mariner who's trying to get, you know, into port.
Well, it's a huge difference in time, and it is something that the international ships can, the international fleet coming, let's say, from Europe, they can make up time. So if they know there's a slowdown in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, they can adjust their speed at sea to make up that time. But for the domestic fleet in Canada, it's a real burden, because if you're sailing from Newfoundland to, let's say, Quebec, there's nowhere where you can really make up time if a lot of those, that shipping corridor is closed. You know, if you're going at 20 knots, if you have to slow down to 10 knots, it takes you twice as long. And so a voyage of 120 nautical miles takes a heck of a lot longer at 10 knots than it does at 20. And not necessarily all sections of that grid are closed at the same time. So it depends on how many grids are closed and what the normal operational speed of the vessel is as to how much extra time it takes. The shipping industry works a lot on time delivery, you know, like they're expected in port at a certain time to get the pilots on board, to secure their place beside along the wharf in order to unload and to get out of there and make room for the next ship. And so when ships are substantially delayed, there's quite a chain reaction that occurs. So it's a burden to them, but I do definitely want to give a shout out during this webinar to the bridge crews on the ships, the captains who are complying with the regulations, because they're the ones that are saving right whales right now. Same with the fishermen who are on the boats who have been out there. You know, the snow crab fishery is done now, but there's still lobster. And all of those folks in that industry who have relocated their gear this spring and the previous several years, they're really doing their part to try and reduce this problem. We're taking actions. We're learning as to what actions are more successful than others. So it is a learning process. This area is new for us. It may even be new for the right whales.
It's great to hear how much effort is going in, and a shout out to all the mariners, both fishermen and commercial mariners, who are slowing down and doing what they need to do in order to conserve. It's on all of us, and they're at the front lines of it. Somebody asked, one of our audience members asked, how do we access the Dalhousie University, the dynamic maps that are so cool? People love to see what, particularly now that we're all sort of more penned in than ever, love to look at things like that. How do they find those dynamic maps?
Oh, a simple search, whale map and Dalhousie, D-A-L-H-O-U-S-I-E, will get you to the maps. To the landing page, and when you get to the landing page, there's lots of links, but maybe the first time, click on the blue interactive map, and that'll take you to both the sightings and the survey track lines for the last 2 weeks, whatever time period you're looking at. It'll give you the last 2 weeks. You can adjust your data range. You can adjust whether it's acoustic detections or visual observations that you want to see. You can get on that site and learn about what's been going on really for the last 4 or 5 years.
Great. So Pat, we also have a question about the labeling potential for lobster products, where, you know, the label might say right whale friendly lobster or snow crab. Can you talk about those efforts? I know that is something that we're going to explore potentially in the next of these this series of webinars, but talk about that a little bit, how important that is and how consumers react to that.
Well, I know that the MSC certification for snow crab fishery is something that has been very important here in Canada, that they maintain their certification. It's not an effort right now that we have in Canada in terms of certification for snow crab. I know it's an effort in the US for certification for lobster gear. We're still in the development phases of the ropeless gear testing. So I think that once we have some practical solutions, we'll certainly be able to push forward those certifications. But the MSC certification really is what's relied upon right now for whale-friendly crab that's coming out of the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
Yeah, very cool. And I know that's an important effort to get consumers involved. It's something that then we can do, the rest of us can do, to really help conserve right whales and reward fishermen who are using the right kinds of gear and who are doing everything they can. We had a question, and this is an interesting one, about other populations of right whales. There's a Pacific population that's also, I think, you know, having difficulties. Can either of you speak to that one or other populations? There's southern populations as well. How is the species doing overall?
All right, so these are actually different species. So there's 3 species of right whales in the world. There's southern right whales that can be found in various calving areas, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, to name a few off the top of my head. And they migrate towards the pole, the South Pole, in the summertime and feed in the Antarctic convergence. So they're not followed along their annual migration the way North Atlantic right whales are. Then you have North Pacific right whales that are found off Alaska and have been studied for the last few years. And the population, I think the catalog is about 30 animals. So, you know, I mean, talk about a huge amount of ocean to try and survey. There's possibly animals over off the coast of Russia and Japan as well. So with North Atlantic right whales, we really are able to launch field efforts throughout their range in almost every month of the year. So we're able to really follow those animals up and down the coast. All of these different species can be photographically identified. There's catalogs for all of them in all of the places I've mentioned. And it's kind of nice with right whales because the way they wear their faces, if you will, they can be photographed from a plane or from a boat. So it gives us a lot of different options to study these animals. In the Southern Hemisphere, the population's doing quite well. Geez, the last time I checked, I think it's growing at nearly 10% per year. Little less activity in the Southern Hemisphere in their various areas than our poor old urban right whale faces along the coast of Canada and the US. North Pacific, I think there's a calf or 2 in the catalog, maybe more. I'm not as familiar with that, but a very highly endangered species as well with the existing data.
Pat, is IFAW Canada tracking the North Pacific right whale or just the Atlantic species?
Yeah, our focus is on the North Atlantic right whale at this time. Yeah.
That's great. Yes, and they are separate, distinct species, right, Mo? They are not identical at all, even though they have the same right whale categorization.
Yeah, there are 3 different species, and you know, most of the great underwater shots you see of North Atlantic right whales are actually southern right whales, because and an experienced eye can tell the difference. The callosity pattern does look quite different to an experienced eye, not so much perhaps to the layperson, but you know, North Atlantic right whales swim in a virtual plankton soup most of the time, or down in the South US on the calving ground where the visibility is quite poor. So the filmmakers that try to tell the story for us are always quite frustrated with the lack of underwater images for North Atlantic right whales.
Yeah, they're hard to see. I've tried for a long time myself and never managed. So someday I hope. We have one last question about Newfoundland, and you talked a little bit about sightings there. Are there any of sightings of right whales closer to Newfoundland, so that maybe you could even see them from shore, like in other parts that you've described?
No, you know, the right whales don't seem to be really, there are sightings around Newfoundland, not common. Right whales seem to really focus so far in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, in the southern Gulf, between the Acadian Peninsula and the Magdalen Islands, over towards Cape Breton on the Gulf side. And then there are some that travel right across that shipping corridor between Gaspé and Anacostia Island up towards the lower north shore of Quebec, the Mingan Islands. There are a few sightings around Newfoundland over the years, but not common as those other areas.
Interesting. Well, we're just about out of time. I want to give each of you panelists a chance to sort of sum up and leave us with one last thing. I know the overall message for today is really we have to do more. So if each of you could talk about what more you think could or should be done to try to conserve these magnificent creatures, I think that would be a really helpful way to close out today's session. Mo, I'll start with you.
Alrighty, you know, there's always a lot of focus on the number of births each year, and we all get excited about how many calves are born and who the moms are. But you know, the challenge for all of us engaged with this animal, and that's the biologists, the conservationists, the government folks, the fishermen, the mariners, we all need to be right whale allies. And the goal is getting those calves to their reproductive age so that they can give us some hope for the future for this population. There is a tremendous amount of effort going on to try and keep these whales alive until they reach their reproductive age, have calves of their own, and you know, keep this species as part of the biodiversity of the Northwest Atlantic is into the future.
And Pat?
Yeah, I will just say that the action plan that the government has released, there could be a little bit more in terms of clear and specific targets that they could be identifying to reduce the threats that these whales are facing. So I would encourage anyone who's listening to take a look at IFAW.org, take a look at the action and become engaged, and just share information with whoever you know about whales, and stay tuned as we have more information. We'll know more at the end of November how the whales fared this year in Canadian waters, and yeah, just stay tuned.
Great, thank you so much. And I just want to say, this has been a really incredible discussion. I want to thank Mo and Pat for their wonderful contribution this morning and for all the work they do every day to try to save these wonderful and magnificent creatures from extinction. It is something that I know so many people are working on in both your organizations, and it couldn't be more important now. And I hope that with you know, increased technology and this great commitment, we can conserve the right whale for our children and grandchildren to get to enjoy. I want to thank everyone for who attended online, for tuning in. It was really great to have you here. Want to just note that IFAW has another event called Party for a Porpoise on August 10th that benefits this work. So if you get a chance, go to their website, check that out and attend. They'll send a link in follow-up to today's webinar. And just say, have a great rest of your day. And please tune in again for the third in this series on right whale labeling, right whale safe labeling on seafood products, which will be the next thing that IFAW will be talking about in their series, and that will be in early September. So thank you all, have a great day, and thank you again to Pat and Mo for their wonderful contribution this morning. Take care, everyone, and be well.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.